Hello, everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining us on today's webinar, Back to Normal, the Future of Extended Enterprise Training. My name is Alexa. I'm the Events and Webinar Coordinator here at Brandon Hall Group, and I will be kicking things off for us today. Let's start with some introductions. Our presenters today are Ken Joseph, Principal Analyst here at Brandon Hall Group, and David Proegler, Senior Managing Principal and Product Manager of Latitude Learning. David has spent his career designing and implementing business-focused solutions that synthesize business needs with technology. He brings these talents to the Latitude Learning LMS and his leading efforts to engage the market and address the future demands of the extended enterprise training space. David's technical acumen and focus on client business outcomes provide an important bridge between Latitude Learning, their clients, and the market. I would like to extend a thank you to Latitude Learning for sponsoring today's webinar. Since 2005, Latitude Learning has been delivering impactful learning solutions that are tailored to the extended enterprise, partner, dealership, reseller, and distribution networks. Since their first deployment, Latitude Learning has embraced and addressed the unique challenges that extended enterprise presents to learning management systems. Their systems have been helped to manage and deliver training to millions of network employees, delivering hundreds of millions of course completions and certifications. For those of you that aren't familiar with Brandon Hall Group is a research and analyst firm that empowers excellence in organizations around the world through our research and tools. A quick mention that we currently have several certification programs open for enrollment, including our Certified Learning Strategist program. Visit certifications.brandonhall.com to learn more about how to earn that designation. Your participation in our surveys is one of the most crucial components for our research. So if you have a few minutes to spare and see any topics that you can take a survey for, it's greatly appreciated. Links will be available in your handout, or you can always visit brandonhall.com. All participants receive a piece of complimentary research once the results are analyzed. And finally, a few logistics. To ask questions, we ask that you please use the questions panel on your control bar. Today's presentation is being recorded. We will share a link to the recording and a PDF of the presentation via email in roughly 24 hours. If you would like to download a copy of today's presentation instantly, the link to do so will be available in the chat momentarily. The chat is also open for today, so we invite you to join in on today's discussion and share your thoughts as we go through, or just simply pop in, say hello, and let us know where you're joining from today. And without further delay, I'll pass things over to Ken so we can dive right in.
Thank you very much, Alexa. Appreciate your help in putting this all together. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Let's start today's session by defining what we mean by extended enterprise learning. When most people think about learning and development, they tend to default to the traditional model, which is a business training its employees. Extended enterprise learning is corporate learning, however, that's targeted at external non-employees. So folks who are outside your company but are part of your company's extended enterprise. That may include both customers and partners. Our research shows that this segment of learning continues to grow. It's become a very robust segment in our 2022 Extended Enterprise Learning Study, which we conducted in November of last year. We found nearly 2/3 of organizations deliver learning content to at least one non-employee group. And as we go deeper into the session, we'll cover why companies are continuing to invest their money, time, and resources into this space. So when we look at extended enterprise learning, customers are clearly the single largest extended enterprise learning group, with 65% of organizations reporting that they do extend learning to their customer base. But today, we're going to be focused primarily on partner network training, which is comprised of most of the groups that are below customers in this and reflected in this graphic. So that's going to include resellers, dealers, distributors, manufacturers, suppliers, or other partners that may make up your company's extended enterprise. So one of the things we found, and David, I found this to be one of the most interesting findings from our survey, is that while L&D obviously owns internal training, the lines of ownership are much less clear when you look at extended enterprise learning. We can see, for instance, even with customer training, operations may own the customer training. With resellers, sales and product tend to be the major owners. With distributors, L&D has 38%, operations has 38%. With suppliers, sales may be the owner, and operations 25%. And over the course of my 30 years in the learning and development, I've seen this cause tremendous amounts of friction. Typically, learning and development does own the expertise, and they may own the technology, but the other folks in the organization, operations, sales, or the product people, tend to own the relationships with the partners. And as I've said, I've seen this really blow up. Sometimes organizations even invest in multiple LMSs or multiple technology stacks rather than share one platform, simply because organizational silos find it easier to do this and to operate that way. So let me just hand things over to you and ask if that's something that you've seen.
No, Ken, Ken, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for taking the time today to listen to this presentation. Ken, I completely concur. I know as we prepared for this and I saw the details of this survey, this slide actually stood out to me because quite often when you think about the extended enterprise and what it means, where it's owned really does influence the behaviors. Standard L&D functions are there, but if your primary motivation is selling product or operations efficiency or whatever it might be, that really does influence what's going on. And you made a very salient point there, and that is that it's not uncommon, because the unique nature of training this space, that a single LMS doesn't fit that model. I don't want to be pejorative to anyone that's out there, but obviously there's some unique practices that live in this space, unique qualities of training these kinds of organizations where you don't own the people. You have to sort of set the expectation and let them run with it, that I think are uniquely challenging here. And by the way, the owning organizations that are influencing that and competing with or vying for or supporting of their L&D operation with the organization really is a very prevalent model in this space.
Great. And I think we'll return to this subject a little bit later on in our presentation when we talk about some of the challenges faced. Another interesting finding was just how extensive, what organizations use extended enterprise learning for. So again, customer-directed learning is most prevalent. But if you look a little further down on this graphic, 48% of organizations do use extended enterprise learning for partner training, and 40% use it to certify their partners. That's quite a substantial chunk of this space. So, David, let me ask, what are you seeing as a general state of partner training, and are we bouncing back? COVID had a very big impact on how things are done in the partner training world.
Reflecting back on some of the other presentations we've done in this space, it took a hit with regards to, they were immediately impacted when the pandemic hit. They had to really change the way they were training. And I guess what I want to point out here is that a lot of this partner training, no matter how much we wanted it to, how much you can put in the virtual space, a lot of cases when you're talking about turning a wrench, you're talking about repairing vehicles, you're talking about manufacturing things. The reality is that there is no replacement for hands-on. And so this was impacted when they had to shut those facilities down. But what we're seeing as sort of the label or the title of the webinar presentation is return back. We're seeing a big lashback to going back to really instructor-led, heavy instructor-led. Not that there's other technology that have come in play. I know we'll talk about it later, but you're seeing that lashback. You're seeing a move back to what was really the pre-pandemic posture for these organizations, really trying to make sure they can keep their networks up to speed, trained at the level they need them, and they can begin to roll out new product efficiently and effectively.
Okay. So why don't you lead us through some of the things you're seeing as sort of the current state of
Yeah.
of partner training.
By way of background here, it's interesting, the slide title, hopefully it's showing up for everyone a little better than it is on my screen, but regardless here, we have, when we look at this, Latitude has had the privilege of working in this space for a long time. And we have established relationships with obviously our customer base and a broad selection of other people that are in the extended enterprise. And we utilize that platform to be able to have ongoing conversation, whether that's to see where the market is going to influence our products, or just to see in general what's happening and what do we need to be aware of. And really, the state of partner training is trending back to pre-pandemic models, but really the conditions have gotten more difficult. First of all, the issues in these networks, as a lot of people already know, is finding more people to come into that, right? The number of people going into service-based industries continues to dwindle, or continues to be a challenge. The number of senior people that have been the gray hairs they've relied on to do work in these networks are retiring at a higher rate. So you have this tension there of people coming in, and then ultimately, management looked at this whole thing and said, okay, we had this pandemic and we stopped going to training centers. We did other things, but now you want to go back to what it was before. And that leaves training organizations sort of in the middle, regardless of where they fall in the enterprise. So what we're seeing is really just a lot more tension between those various layers in this training model, and some additional considerations that have really have always been there, but even become a little more prevalent, is the idea: are you a captive or a partner network? Meaning, if you're an automotive OEM, you have all your dealerships, and your relationship with those dealerships and mandates with regards to training and other things actually tend to be built into the agreements, and there are a lot of carrots and sticks that are there, versus the idea of partner networks, where you're one of many brands going out to being sold by the partner you're relying on. And what you do to support them and what you do to make sure they're getting trained appropriately is vitally important to your success, especially as we sort of bring back or start to roll out new products and other things. It's become very prevalent. And that second bullet there, increased competition in partner networks, you're always vying for a spot and making sure with the turnover that's going on that you're able to train them efficiently and effectively so they can execute and sell your products and support your products and all those kinds of things is vitally important. So there's some additional considerations that we identified in our conversations. And the primary concerns that really came out of this was, dealers and partners are demanding more support from the OEMs. Not that you haven't provided at high levels before, but because they're dealing with the lack of resources, because they're dealing with these other demands, right there, they want more to be able to be more efficient in the delivery of their services. OEM training organizations having to deliver with fewer resources, because none of none of the training elements we spoke with have increased their footprint. They've actually decreased their footprint. And as we said earlier, the senior leadership is looking for impact and delivery efficiency, right? They want the training to have impact, but you need to deliver as efficiently as possible. So those are the really big concerns we want to cover in this presentation.
And before we move off the slide, David, this thing about increased competition in partner networks, it reminds me a little bit about the issue that enterprises face when they're doing customer training. You don't own those people. You can't make them do anything. So it's if it's a captive network, yes, as you said, you have contractual mandates that say so many people need to be certified in your repair shop or what have you. So I would imagine that there are some of the same pressures to make the content, the learning content, engaging and highly relevant, so that partner networks will say, this is worth our time versus the other 6 or 7 companies we're selling stuff for.
That's a great question. The simple answer is yes, but you're also having to make it even richer for the partner networks, because you're vying against some other person providing that same training to them. You have to be more efficient in the understanding of how does my part system work, or how do I repair this? It has to be easier to use because they're having turnover, and you want to make sure that your products are top of mind and your tools are top of mind to them as well.
Right.
So let's talk about the partner network here. I'm going to the dealership partner networks, the pressure that are really going on here is these network managers continue to struggle with the acquisition of talent, the loss of senior talent departing. We've heard over and over again that you walk into a dealership or you go to a location and the guy that's doing the majority of the work is a 30-year master technician, or a third person's been there. But there's always this fear they're going to leave. And by the way, they don't have the bandwidth to be mentors or everything else. And they're really looking at the OEMs to provide greater support and help with these issues. And the things we heard consistently were the idea of need for more baseline training. Yes, they're still being fed from the trade schools and other things, but because of the lack of people coming into the funnel, these locations are actually reducing their barriers to entry or reducing the requirement to come in. So what ends up happening is the individuals that are coming in may not have that baseline line of training, and they need to get them trained. So if I'm going to bring someone in at the lowest level, they need to be a lube tech. They're going to come in and do something at a dealership. You got to give it to them, because guess what? I'm not saying they don't know what an engine is, but it's a level lower than the baseline training that was being provided previously. They need training more often because the turnover is frequent. And if you're not providing that training, whether it's instructor-led or e-learning, right, you run the risk of them not knowing what to do when they get there. So the frequency is increased. The same demands has always been out there. They need to limit time off the shop floor. We all know that if you're running organizations like these, the individuals that aren't driving trucks or fixing vehicles or making something, they're not producing items, and they're not generating revenue for your organization. So that becomes an even bigger challenge, especially as you have the middles shrinking, the ends are not growing as fast, and the top end is not growing, is shrinking as well. With less senior talent to mentor, they rely more heavily on the OEMs, because you look at that senior talent that's out there, you want to be able to make sure that the individuals are able to educate or help the younger people coming in. You want to make sure that first 90-day experience in your location is valuable and meaningful. And if you aren't mentoring, if you're not supporting that, you're going to be at risk. And all this puts more pressure on the OEM turning into these throughout the process for a lot of different reasons.
So before we move on to some of the pressure, the response to some of these pressures, I'm curious, why is baseline training suddenly becoming more of an issue? I mean, you're saying that the trade schools don't have as many people. Do you have any insights as to what's changed, what's dried up?
It's not that the trade schools are changing what they're doing. They are perfectly adequate. It's that the number of people going into them and coming out of them and going into these locations are reduced. And so if you have to fill that gap, you open that gap up to anyone that's out there, anyone who might be interested in that. And there's a willingness, right, to bring someone in like that. If you find a passionate individual, help them get started, get them in and get their career going. It's vitally important. This is not an indictment of the trade school at all. It's a matter of the volume of people coming through and trying to fill the gap that's there. And what they're turning to is, okay, let me open this up. Let me figure out how to get someone in, and can I take someone who's whole cloth and make something out of them? And that's really where this gap comes in, and then putting additional baseline demands, sort of lower level demands than they've needed in the past.
Okay, and you talked about sort of the dwindling supply of senior talent. Mm-hmm. In fact, this is something that's, I think, not just limited to partner network training. This is something we're seeing all across, really all across the whole spectrum of L&D. Is that your elite performers, the folks that have been around a while, are leaving, and their knowledge or their expertise isn't necessarily captured. And that's starting to leave a gap. What makes it so especially critical in partner network training, do you think?
Oh, I think, we all rely on those gray hairs, the experience, everything else. And at the end of the day, in partner networks, I'll be candid, it turns into efficiency of delivery. If I'm going to trade off, do I need to train someone and have them be a mentor, or do I want them turning a wrench? The reality is I'd rather have my senior guy turning a wrench, because he's just more efficient at doing it. And so the fear is that if I pull him away to do mentorship, he's not working. And oh, by the way, if I pull him away to do that, he's not going to do this anymore because he wants to come in. If they've achieved that level, they probably just want to come in and do what they've been asked to do. Turn a wrench, be good at doing that. And that's a generalization more than a specific characterization. But I think the reality is that's always the struggle they're facing. And oh, by the way, at some point, someone's going to get tired and turn a wrench too and decide it's time to leave. So I think they're always facing those risks there.
All right, so let's talk about the response to these demands then.
Yeah. So really, the OEM response is taking action, and with respect to this, really increasing online baseline training classes. This isn't just simply the idea of the corporate way or the basic of their technology. It's even going lower than that. It's going into some of the basics of automotive skills. That is a layer that wasn't there before. Didn't mean it didn't exist, but it certainly wasn't emphasized. The idea of creating more online baseline training so it can be shared with the OEMs, right? More detailed assessments. We've heard this repeatedly. The idea of using assessments in a more profound way, defining what it can do in terms of not just simply true, false, multiple choice, fill in the blank, but also the idea of detailed diagrams and other things. And are you ready to move forward in this whole thing? Because ultimately, are you prepared to take the next layer of class over there? So using assessments as opposed to solely relying on ILT sessions or mentors that might be there. Offering regional ILT that spans dealerships, is more in the efficiency side of things, right? As opposed to coming into, and actually there's more for partner networks as well. Most captive organizations rely on training centers, regional training centers, established things they have in place, but partner networks and really sort of used to treat these things as one-offs. They go to dealer A, dealer B, dealer C, and what they're trying to figure out now are models that allow them to span multiple dealerships and be much more efficient with the limited training resources they have. Again, I think this next goal of reducing the length of ILT, it's a different way of saying, look, making blended more efficient. We've seen this throughout the pandemic, that the reality is that squeezing one more day or 4 more hours or whatever it might be is really turning into almost an instructional design skill set that you need to have. But ultimately, what you're trying to do is move as much as you possibly can to those virtual technologies, virtual classroom, e-technologies, those kinds of things, and only get them on the floor when you need them on the floor. And really, the other thing that we're beginning to see the roots of is support and develop for mentor programs. So they're incenting people in the networks, they're providing the tools they need and that kind of stuff, just so they can get that process and push more tools down to the partner networks to be able to handle their own needs out there.
Great. So let's talk a little bit more about the delivery modalities that is being used for extended enterprise learning, since you really just started talking about it there. So at one point, prior to COVID, instructor-led training or in-person training was the #1 modality by quite a ways. During COVID, we saw that fall. I think it was down to the 5th most common modality. And now it's clearly rebounding. I mean, it's at 65% are now in our latest survey from the end of 2022. The in-person learning was used by 65% of organizations to deliver it. The remote meeting tools such as Zoom and Teams still is in the top spot. Other things that makes a lot of sense for remote delivery, like videos and e-learning course modules, virtual classrooms, and webinar platforms are all also up there as important modalities to deliver training in partner networks. One of the things that kind of stood out to me here, though, is virtual reality. So in other types of learning, the non-extended enterprise learning, we've seen virtual reality kind of establish itself. And, because people didn't have access to instructor-led training, a lot of companies said, well, let's give this a try. And we've seen it established. I mean, it's not by any long shot the number one modality, but a lot more companies are trying it, and it's, I think, up in the 20% range. Here, it's around 8%. So my question to you, David, is: did you think that VR would have been sort of a more established modality during the pandemic? Well, and why hasn't it taken off in your view?
Yes, I think everyone thought that, first of all, this quick move to alternative training modalities, again, Zoom is the leader in the clubhouse by far. I would argue that even in person is almost coming back to the high sevens. Regardless of that, I think everyone thought that the virtual reality and AR platforms would solve a lot of problems, would be heavily used. And two things come to mind. One, I think there's a desire to do it. I think the technology availability is there. We've certainly seen things like, the various Google Glass products and the Microsoft products are out there are really nice tools and being more efficient to deliver. However, I think there's an accessibility and just a more real comfort with in person. It's easy to do. We have a device, we can do it. I think one of the other things that we heard was the ability and getting away from automotive and mechanical. We've heard it from others that basically said, look, they've invested millions of dollars to create labs to be able to simulate different scenarios with regards to their products and failure things. So you can put a technician in a lab, simulate a failure, and they can repair it real time, right? That you can't really do from a virtual perspective. So I think it's coming. It'll continue to creep up slowly. The more efficient it gets, and we've seen a lot of those things out there that, hey, give me the CAD drawing and I'll be able to do the overlay and put it out there. I think the other route is these OEMs and have invested a lot of money in existing training, and going back and redoing it for a new technology isn't cost advantageous either. So there are a lot of things that might be working against a little bit, but we do see it improving.
Yeah, and it could be that if you are using VR with the headsets, the added expense, particularly for a lot of headsets, for an extended enterprise audience, might also be a factor in organizations being careful about jumping into making that investment as well.
Mm-hmm. Agreed.
So this slide, this graphic, is really about the challenges that we found in our survey that organizations were facing in delivering extended enterprise training. I don't think the three top challenges are going to surprise most people. Organizational silos, and we'll get back to that in a second. Difficulty in measuring learning effectiveness, and not having the right technology. We touched a little earlier on how ownership of partner networks can create friction if multiple groups are vying, or if the owner of the group doesn't necessarily have the technology and the learning expertise to provide learning for that group, or if different groups are sort of, for lack of a better term, competing over who owns learning for a partner network. We're going to talk about the challenge of measuring learning effectiveness in a little more detail. That's again not something that's just endemic to partner network training. I think anywhere you go in the world of L&D, it's always a challenge to measure effectiveness. I think there are some things that are unique, though, to partner network training that pose some challenges in that direction. And another thing to bear in mind, and you made this point a little bit earlier, David, was that not all LMSs are equally capable of delivering training to an extended enterprise. Maybe if we have time, we can sort of get back and talk about that a little bit. But the one other thing I wanted to mention here is that 29% of audiences says that they lack the insight to provide learning for an external group. To me, that's very tied into the organizational silo piece. Again, if you don't own the relationships, or you don't in the partner network, or you don't know the audience that well. Let's say you're an internal L&D group and you're used to delivering learning to internal employees and not to partners. It's a whole different world. So how do these challenges sort of match up with your real life experience?
I think they're spot on. The two. So we'll talk about difficulty measuring effectiveness later, because I think it's a very important point as you're developing learning programs here, measuring the right kind of way. Measure the right things and do it effectively. But more importantly, on this slide specifically, lack of the right technology and lack of insight into external groups really is sort of one of those gaps that we see out there, right? Again, being able to define a program centrally and distribute it out among your disparate networks, and allowing the individuals to know exactly what they need to do and have visibility to it and everything else, I think really ties directly together with regards to the technology and the insight side of things. And it's a gap in the LMSs that are out there. If you're thinking that I'm going to be training a single cohort, corporate cohort and everything else, and you don't really want to manage the external complexities of training extended enterprise organizations, you're in a bad spot. And we've seen it get people in our conversations. We've seen it put organizations in a tough spot in terms of being able to efficiently deliver, manage, monitor, and execute, and really meet the mission of making sure these partner networks are trained as efficiently and effectively as they can be. And it's really a limitation of the technology and visibility too.
Yeah, so let me actually dig a little deeper into that, David. Your company produces, an LMS used for extended enterprise learning. What are the key differences in an LMS or another learning distribution platform, if you're using that would really help drive extended enterprise learning most effectively?
I think there are probably two or three important points. One, the ability to model very complex organizational structures, right? We don't, because you don't know how many partners you're going to have. Are you local, regional, global? And you could have different positions within that. The ability to model that and manage that complexity is a must. You have to be able to look at that. And oh, by the way, being able to, once you've defined all that, being able to turn control of that training program over to your partner network, so they have visibility and they have some ownership of what's going on. I think that's the first thing. The second thing is really defining the idea of what it means to be an effective member of that network. If you look at it from a partnership perspective, you have an idea, you as the OEM or the manufacturer have an idea of the roles that people need to play to be effective, whether you're a driver, whether you're a repair person, whether you're a salesperson, whatever it might be. And what you have to do is be able to define those things clearly. What are the skills they need? When do they need to have them? What's the mix of talent based on the size of the entity you have? What are those elements that you need that you can define, and what you need to be able to measure it is really the second thing. So you can now define a clear path. And lastly, looking at the ideas of measurement. Oftentimes in learning environments, we focus on some of the mundane things. I know we'll get to it later, but the idea of course completions and, did you like the course and that kind of stuff. Nothing against those things. It really does help the learning elements to make sure they're putting good course materials out there. But more importantly, we look at these networks and we know what the performance metrics are. You got to tie those things together into the training you're doing, so you're having an impact along the way.
Great. Thank you very much, David. Before we go much further, I just want to remind the audience that you can input questions into the Q&A or into the chat box, and we'll try to get to those in a couple of minutes. So go ahead, David.
As we get this OEM training pressure, I apologize. The title's doing what they're doing anyway. Really, I think this is a little bit of a repeat from the earlier slide of the challenges, but I wanted to bring this up because this was repeated over and over again. Talking to OEM or talking to a partner, they had one thing. The OEM, they have a similar view of the same problem. Really, more baseline training service to bring new members up to speed. It's something they haven't had to deal with before, right? These pressures, again, doing more with less. Assessment and competency evaluation mechanisms. Current ones are limited. They have to be thinking about what the new capability needs to be. I mean, really taking advantage of more advanced assessment capability, branching, logic, graphical, all the things that are going to make it a much richer assessment, and being able to glean information from those assessments to ensure that what they're putting out there and what they're testing really does match up with what they're training, or with what they are training. ILT and VILT participant readiness. This has been something that's been evolving and percolating for a while. It's become a little more prevalent coming out of the pandemic, as again, the other challenge we talked about earlier. But are the people ready to take an ILT or VILT course? More importantly, an ILT course. If you're going to invest the time that an individual is going to show up, you're going to let them off their shop floor, off the manufacturing floor, or where they're going to be, are they going to get value out of that session? And a lot of times they're seeing people show up, hey, Joe is available today. Joe, go sit in this class. And Joe doesn't know the basics. Joe doesn't know the things he's going to do. And in a worst case, someone comes in and they don't know. And we've heard stories, anecdotal stories or direct stories of, a student coming in, not knowing how a piece of equipment worked and breaking a very valuable piece of equipment in a training space. At a minimum, they're taking away a seat for another student who could be there. Again, getting back to the efficiency problem. But in worst case, they could be breaking something or even hurting themselves as we move into this electric vehicle space and all the things that go along with that. Squeezing more out of blended learning, I said earlier, really, how much more can you squeeze out? Because really what they were trying to work on, and ensuring offerings are full and optimized rather than siloed. Those are, again, a little bit of redundancy here, but again, from the person running the training program, these things put additional pressures on them that they have to address. And because behind them, they have a management team going, hey, I need this to be more impactful. I need you to do it for less, kind of deal.
So you mentioned squeezing more out of blended learning models. I think this is a trend that's all throughout corporate learning, not just, again, partner network training. A lot of organizations call this the flipped classroom model, the goal being to digitize as much of the content as possible for self-directed learning, and then to use in-person instructors for the sort of rich, high-end, real-life scenario interactions with learners, thereby sort of squeezing the number of days. And other things we've seen also is that there's usually some kind of gated admission or assessment to that, to the instructor-led training part, just because they expect people to be on a certain level in order to get enough out of the class and to participate in the class. Is that similar to the trend that you've been seeing in partner training?
Spot on. I think spot on. I think you could directly apply what you just said. Really does apply to this environment, and is accelerating even more because they're realizing they want to get value out of the IoT they're conducting. And in an extreme case, I'll tell you, we have customers that are actually sending people off to testing locations to make sure they're ready to go into the next stage of things. So in extreme cases, they're making these huge investments to make sure people are ready to go through the next round of training they need to take to avoid wasting the effort of the organization along the way.
Okay. So your next slide, it should be titled OEM Training Response. I don't know why that's being...
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, we're lost the training. Too bad that I guess our player. So yeah, so our hang on, did you change slides here?
Yeah, I did. We should be on. Oh, did I?
Oh yeah,
did
sorry, exactly.
Yeah.
I thought, no, can you go one more, please? I think.
Hang on, sorry, my computer has stopped.
There we go. Oh,
there we go.
Went two slides there. Go back one. So more baseline training. So
there we go.
there we go.
Sorry, folks.
Right. So again, repetitive here. The response and impact. More baseline training is supporting. More baseline training is supporting training materials. They're really developing these materials and it's just the creation of content. I've said it a couple times now. It's beyond just it's the base of turning wrench. It may be the base of the vehicle, maybe the basic understanding that you rely otherwise on someone being educated before they come in. The other thing I see really we're hearing some impacts on is turning responsible for baseline prep over to the partner. So by providing these materials, they're now saying, look, we're going to let you train your new employees coming in. So the approach that we're seeing consistently here is arming the partner network with the tools they need to educate the junior people coming in to be more efficient. Again, the pressure's on the OEM training entity to create the materials, but the pressure is put on the partner to make sure their individual is ready to go. This sort of leads into the next one, the idea of more engaging assessments and testing services as baseline knowledge as a prereq to advanced training. You can't get into the advanced stuff unless you know the basic stuff. And really, the last aspect of partner model networks making the shift to regional shared classes across the training offerings they provide. This has some interesting challenges in the sense that you would hope to partner with a dealer along this, and the partner networks don't necessarily have established programs with trade schools and that kind of stuff that other OEM and captive models do, or the regional training centers. But at least the effort to make it and optimize the services is really a move that I think is beginning to gain a lot of traction and getting the efficiencies out there that they're looking for.
So I understand why the OEMs are putting pressure on the partners, but how are the partners responding to this? Are they stepping up? Are they able to address these issues?
They are. I mean, I think it's difficult. Again, go back to the measurement side of things. They're willing to take on this role. I think it's in its infancy enough at this point that it's a little early to assess its full impact, but it's the move we're seeing pretty consistently among the people we talk to is like, we got to put this material out there. We don't have the bandwidth to do all the training. So let's put the materials in the hands of the partners and let them be ready to go on those kinds of things. So we hear that as a trend. I honestly don't have a clear answer how impactful it's been as of yet, because I do think it's a fairly early in its stages of deployment.
Great. Okay. So let's move on to one of our favorite topics. How do you measure the effectiveness of your extended enterprise learning? So, again, I'll say it again. This is not a challenge solely for extended enterprise learning. This is a universal challenge across learning and development. But I think there are some things that perhaps makes it a little more challenging in extended enterprise learning. For one thing, you can't compel your partners, or at least you can't always compel your partners, and you certainly can't compel your customers to take assessments. They're not part of your company, and they're just not going to do that.
Right.
A few things jump out at me as I look at this graphic. Certainly, one is the 23% don't measure learning effectiveness at all. And then another thing is that other than the testing assessments on the top line at 46%, most of the measures are not grounded in actual organizational performance. Only 31% say that they use KPIs, 27% say that they use performance data, 19% only use sales data, and only 15% use data from the level of support interactions. It's an old story in L&D, but it still makes my stomach hurt, because without measuring actual impact or business performance, it is just so difficult to convince your executives to maintain their investment. One, to show that what you're doing is on target, but for them to also step up and keep investing in doing what you're doing. So, David, what would you say makes measuring learning effectiveness particularly challenging in the partner training space?
I think all the things you just said is the normal modus operandi for training entities is to use the things that aren't impactful: learner surveys, customer sat, testing assessment, completions, and questionnaires. There's nothing wrong with those, but those are feeding back to the training entity that the materials they're putting out there are valid, right? Obviously, testing may fall in that, depending on how detailed they are, clearly falls in the category of effectiveness and everything else. But the things that, when we look at partner networks, even if you took the training out of it, right? You walk into any company that has a partner network, they measure them by sales volume. Let's just sort of generically, they measure by sales volumes. They measure by repair orders. They measure by parts sold. They measure by customer satisfaction. They measure by the individual doing the work. And there's a common phrase: fixed first visit, or you fixed right the first time. Pick your acronym, but they all have them out there in some way, shape, or form. And those KPIs are already out there. And so you're building this training program that's supposed to make sure this network's efficient, but you're not using any of it to measure the effectiveness of your training. So what you really ultimately need to do is marry those things together. Don't try to reinvent the wheel. I'm not saying don't do the first 4 or 5 things here, but you got to figure out how to marry those things together, because if you're going to move the needle, you got to know what they are. And one story that we know of, we had an organization we're working with right now that is talking about, their management only looked at the idea of sales data in their network. But when they actually put together a holistic scorecard of everything that's going on in their network, those top sales organizations are actually not the best organizations and best partners in their network, because they're not doing a lot of repair orders. They're not moving a lot of parts, and they probably don't have a lot of great customer satisfaction from a repair perspective. So what you really want to look at it holistically and make sure you're moving the needle in the right. Don't reinvent KPIs. Bring them in. Bring the ones that are already there, and it makes the conversation with management a lot easier. And don't be in that 23% either.
Hey. And for those of you who aren't doing partner network training, the same goes for all of you as well. This is just so critical, and it just comes up again and again and again. So this is the last survey slide from our study in 2022, and this is about why companies use extended enterprise learning. We've just spent the last 45 minutes or so talking about some of the challenges, some of the tensions, some of the issues. But now let's look at the flip side. If there are so many difficulties involved, why bother? Why should companies invest in extended enterprise learning? With all those expenses and challenges? Well, there are very good reasons for that. A whopping 77% say it improves customer relations. 68% say it increases awareness of their brand or their products or their services. 41% say it maximizes customer retention and increases sales. 27% say it reduces customer support interactions and helps build demand or lead generation. So, despite the challenges that we've outlined here, most companies are driven to do this because the results are just so darn valuable. Now, it's obvious, in partner networks that well-trained partners are extremely valuable to an OEM. They're the ones that are doing the selling, they're the distributing, or what have you. And if they don't know what they're doing, then as an OEM, your sales and your services are going, and are going to suffer, and your support costs are probably going to be much higher as well. So, David, I don't know if you have anything to say about this particular slide, but if not, we can sort of talk about summarizing the key challenges and key takeaways.
No, so my only quick response to this, this is another great slide out of this study, and I think replace in a partner network, replace customer with partner, replace client retention with partner. This is, it depends on what lens you're looking through, but if you're trying to retain those partners and maximize what those partners are doing, maximize ultimately what your customers are doing, right? I think these are vital things to be able to, it helps and drives your business. And if you're not doing it, you're not moving up the value chain in those partner networks, right? You got to make sure, and it'll be on the next slide here in a couple of seconds, that is one of the things that's out there. So let's go ahead to the next slide and sort of wrap this discussion, which I think is hopefully very productive.
Yeah. And just again, I see we have one customer question. If other folks have questions, please feel free to submit them now. We're going to get to those in just a moment.
So one more. So this one should say client management pressures that are out there. And I didn't want to go, as we've talked about, this is sort of 3-layer cake. The partner network entities, the OEM training partners, and the OEM management. Because the OEM management, look, deliver efficiently, right? Yeah, and they saw all the benefits of the return to going to virtual and lack of travel and all the other things that happened during the pandemic. And they're saying, why can't we keep that, right? So their big challenges are like, they want cost of delivery, right? How come your cost of delivery is going up? What do you need this thing for? Why do you want to go back to ILT. And, the training entities are going, look, guys, turning a wrench can only be done in person. So trying to find that balance. Measure impact, as we just talked about. Oftentimes, no one's utilizing the tools that are already out there to actually measure the impact of the training program you're having, right? So you don't know how you're impacting business. So managers look at you like, what's the value to me, to you? Or why are you as my training entity, how are you moving the needle for me? Position against other products in the partner networks, because you're fighting for that. You're fighting for eyeballs. You're fighting for a position in these partners who might be selling 4 or 5 other brands. You have to provide the training that is out there. They want to make sure the training is being provided, be able to move up that value chain, to make your products easier to sell, to make your products easier to support, and all the things. And it's just the technology. It's even just the tools you're providing them to make sure they know how to use it effectively to be impactful. And new technology support and readiness, because we're entering a time right now, coming out of the pandemic, moving into electric and everything else. We're seeing a huge amount of new product being released out there, and making sure that technology has the right support going out in the market. It's ready for it. You're ready to support it. You're ready to fix it. You're ready to sell it. All things go along with. Those are the challenging concerns that management is really putting pressure on their training organizations to be more efficient at. And our guidance, as we alluded to before, use business KPIs to measure impact, right? Do those with regards to all the things I mentioned: your sales numbers, your service numbers, your repair order numbers, your fixed versus all those metrics that are already established, whatever they might be for your partner network. You have to bring those into your training and make an alignment between the curriculum and learning you're offering, the programs you're offering, the people that are trained, and also what the impact is having. Are we moving the needle? And don't expect to move it by 75 points. You might be only talking a few points, but you're having an impact. And then when you're doing that, then you can balance high performing locations and low performing locations, and be able to draw a correlation between the two, which is vitally important, which we don't often do. Why is this dealership more effective? Well, they have trained people and they're doing all these other stuff. Look at it holistically and really bake those measurements into your training program. So those are really guidance things we've had looking at the management side of things and how that's impacting the training folks along the way.
Okay, and this is your summary of findings.
Yeah, real quick. The punchline to all of this, as we looked at this entire network, and this is evolving, but I think the key takeaways that we saw in looking at and talking to the various partners we spoke to in prep for this is really increased baseline training, delivery, and assessment capabilities. It's vitally important with regards to making sure they're able to secure the individuals are coming in. I haven't said it much here, but we understand from conversations that you have at a minimum 30 days, at most 90 days to secure that new individual. Because if you don't provide that right environment, they may leave, right? They may go trade up for access, go someplace else, which all you've done is then gave them some baseline training and they've walked out the door. So hand in hand with the supporting partners with the training tools, and let them manage their own their entry level talent, right? Making sure that they are prepared to provide an environment with mentoring, with training, and all the things that go along with that, to allow them to secure that new talent, have them stay and become engaged and become really meaningful members to that network, and be able to have a vision for where they want to go. Because what we also know is those new individuals coming in really want an idea of how they're going to succeed in this network. What do they need to do to be successful? Where do they need to go? And immediate feedback. And are the younger generations really want that immediate? Am I leveling up? Am I doing what I need to do to be successful? Focus on ILT delivery efficiencies, we've mentioned many times. Measure more effectively. Use those KPIs. Don't reinvent the wheel. Don't create something else. Use what you currently have. And lastly, we say this to everyone: if you do these things, you want to become a more strategic business partner. Going back to one of those very first slides where Ken showed that an L&D, corporate L&D function may not be managed. You may be a product-based L&D function who's delivering your product training, or you may be in sales, whatever it might be. You need to be a strategic business partner. You can't be an afterthought. You need to be strategically positioning yourself to make sure that you're having an impact, and help them see that bringing all this stuff together, that your training program is moving the needle. you're moving up within a partner network. You've gone from the third place product to the second place product. Your metric scores have gone up. All those with respect to repair, however you're measuring your network overall. So we believe those are really valuable things. Yes, it's a fairly grandiose phrase, but we believe it's something you really have to be focused on to be successful as this landscape has changed.
Well, great summary. Thank you very much, David. We now get to the point in the session where we're going to take your questions. And so far, I see we have one question. I'm going to have to lean forward to read this because the type is very small. It says, it seems to me, and this is from Tom Merritt, by the way. It seems to me that one of the biggest challenges is the cost of creating training content, especially for low-skilled new hires, because even the veteran employees didn't grow into their positions from scratch. They started already knowing how to turn a wrench. How can companies fill this training content gap?
Well, that's an interesting question. I think I think ultimately it's one of the to be a little bit redundant here, it is one of the pressure. Really, it hasn't been an area they've had to look at. So there are a couple of things here, and Tom's point in reference to military is kind of interesting too. First of all, finding correlations between what someone did in the military and how they might apply to the dealership would be one way to help accelerate someone coming into a dealership, because you may not know what they need. But in the other, or they have accreted some knowledge there that prepares them better to be in the dealership. When you talk about content creation, it really is a little bit of whole cloth kind of new development of material they haven't had to before. So I don't have a great clear answer for that one. I wish I did, candidly. But I think it's just a challenge. There's more content that is developed. I will tell you that one of the bigger challenges with organizations like this is, in some cases, these places have 200-300 courses. Redeveloping just a few of them costs money. Trying to tackle all of them is untenable. So then it becomes a matter of when do things need to be refreshed. But what we're seeing right now is a movement to, I got to create new content completely from whole cloth to meet the immediate demand.
And David, are companies seeing a lot of pressure in partner training just from the rate of development of new products and services as well?
It's always been the case. Yeah, it's always been the case. I mean, you're thankfully, the baseline technologies don't change as much, right? I mean, if it's a diesel engine product, well, the principles of a diesel engine are there. But if we're rolling something different out, right, it has, you have to pay attention to it. It has to be, if you look at the training cycle for a new product release, what you're literally looking at is that thing's going to be launched in, just to use a calendar, it's going to be launched in January. They're talking about definition of what needs to be trained and prepared back in Q1, if not earlier, right? They need that period of time. What are they going to modify to support this? Can we take existing training materials and modify them to support the new product rollout, or do we need to create new stuff to support that demand, right? And then making sure that all the materials that lead up to that being launched, because you have to make sure that before the first unit sold in the dealership, that dealership's prepared to support it. And so that's always been some tension. That's always been a point of contention, but doing that effectively and efficiently is even more so now, because the speed at which things are rolling out isn't initially built on a singular product calendar anymore.
Yeah, and I would add to that, as even as something as you would think would be staid, as for instance, or earth moving equipment. I did some work for Caterpillar, and they introduced GPS driven earth moving machines. Now, that's a very different type of operation than just getting in a machine and pressing levers and going backwards and forwards. You still had to do all of that, but you had to enter GPS coordinates or input GPS coordinates for extremely precise field construction. And that was, working with them on that was a real shock to their system, because they had to revamp, I don't know how many courses, because they had a whole product line, and it was, probably something like 20 or 30 courses that they had to revamp as they added this new technology in.
Well, the one quick parallel to that is we're also now used to having really fancy head units in our car in our cars that do a bunch of different things, but even as recently as 10 years ago, those weren't as prevalent. And now there's a whole line of education, not only on the electronics of the car, but from a sales education, where how do you deliver? How do you make sure people know how to use it? How do you train the customer on it? How are you efficient? It's the same, little bit of a parallel, your example of Caterpillar there, that is the same kind of thing. It just really, as new technologies roll out and new electronic things roll out, new battery technologies, how you can do that. It is a constant challenge, and our pace of delivery only continues to increase.
Well, we're just over 1 hour now, so let me take this time to thank you, David, for spending this time with us and providing your front row seat insights on extended enterprise learning for partner networks. I love the conversation, and I'm really glad we had the opportunity to share it with everyone who joined us today on the call. Thank you also to Latitude Learning for sponsoring the webinar and providing us this hour of time. And everyone watching or registered, you all will get an email shortly that will include a link to a recording, and I think it'll also include a PDF of the slides. And thank you all for your questions. And last but not least, thank you to Alexa, who was doing all kinds of work behind the scenes to make this work well. So thanks again, and goodbye, everyone.
Thank you, Ken. Appreciate the time, Alexa, as well. Enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you.